Hi, I'm Pete Kroll, back with you again for another episode of Dollars and Change, the expert's guide to sustainable and responsible investing. With me today, actually, we are at the ESG for Impact conference just outside of Boulder, and with me today is Jenny Coombs, who developed the CSRIC, or CSRIC, which I learned this week, program, the Chartered SRI Counselor designation, but she also works with Ethic. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Peter.
Give me a little bit about your background. How did you get to this point? What is your background in general?
Sure. So I primarily started in New York City. I graduated college in 2009. Great time to start in the financial services industry, right? My background's in equity research primarily, so I did that for the majority of my career, actually, and did that for a few different firms in New York, and then realized that I just couldn't, in good faith, continue to recommend some of these securities for, retirees and things like that just didn't want to, have that on my conscience, working.
Yeah, they just didn't resonate with who you were.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So I made a vow back in 2015 when I resigned from that position that I was only going to work in the sustainable investing space for the rest of my career. And
that's wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I ended up relocating to Colorado in 2016, and that's when I made a career change and was actually offered a position at the College for Financial Planning. And the expectation was that I would develop a course in sustainable investing during the time that I was there. As it turns out, it actually turned into a designation, which is even better.
Yeah.
And I sought out help from CSRIC in the process of building out that designation, because the funny story was my very first CSRIC conference, I attended an info session for new members, and quite literally the first question they asked in that session was, when is CSRIC going to develop a designation in sustainable investing? And I thought, well, perfect, because there's the drive from their members, and I've got the backing of my accreditation for my employer to do that, and it was just wonderful. So I've partnered with Michael Young from CSRIC, and he and I have over the years developed out this curriculum. We're currently on version 6 of the whole program. So it was quite a rush to get it from the time it was announced that it would be coming to October 9th, 2018 was the official launch date. So that was yesterday, 5 years ago.
Oh, so you're celebrating 5 years.
Yeah.
Yes, we're
exactly 5 years
We're recording this in October of 2023. This will come out a little while longer, a little later than that. But congratulations for that. That's a big milestone. I think I was at the CSRIC conference when it was announced, and I haven't been to a lot of CSRIC conferences, but I was at that one, and I remember them talking about it, and it was important to me. So it was one of the I don't know where I was in the order of people getting it, but I was one of the early ones to get.
Thank you so much.
CSRIC, absolutely. So tell me about the process that you went through to develop the CSRIC, and what went into it, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say a big majority of it, the main framework, came from a very simple, I'll say simple because it takes about 3 hours to complete, CIF's fundamentals course, which they typically would offer to financial advisors. So it was kind of structured around that. I like to equate it as that was the trailer and this was the movie.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah.
It was a lot more. It took all those aspects of that fundamentals course and then really went into them deeper. But then as time went on, I realized there are areas that are not touched upon in that curriculum, but certainly advisors could take advantage of knowing. So what goes into the development of an impact report. It's not necessarily on the advisor to create one, but what goes into it and what makes it a good one.
Because they can explain it better to clients that way,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah. So that sort of expansion on the impact element of things. I also try to take a critical lens to some other aspects of sustainable investing. So the heavily relying on ESG data and ratings and these impact scores and everything like that is wonderful, but you have to understand kind of like there's not that standard in the industry quite
You have
yet.
to take it with a grain of salt.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because there's a lot of black boxes out there. I
for
talk about that
sure.
often. You just don't know what goes into it. In my presentation that I give to, either prospects or other advisors, I take Apple as an example, and I go through a number of different ratings providers, and you look at it, you would not believe the disparity between, these guys are great, and these guys are sort of moderate, and these guys, all over the board.
Right.
And so I like that you add that critical aspect to it.
Yeah, just to recognize that it is one piece of many that you
Right.
want to be using.
Yeah.
And it's not perfect, it's not an exact science, but it's honestly the best thing that we've got going so far. And eventually I feel that there's going to emerge a standard in this space. So there's, quite a few different factors that played into developing out that curriculum, and that was a big piece of it. But ultimately, over time, it was just trying to figure out where are there gaps in knowledge base for advisors, and then trying to build that out for them.
Fill in those
Yes.
gaps. Yeah, it's. There's more and more people I think that are interested in doing what we're doing, and it's nice to have sort of a way to sort of bring everybody together. In a way where we all have got a standardized training on it.
Yeah, and I would love it if that were the case. And, it would make it so much easier if the SEC could make up their mind as to what, that standard looks like.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be very comprehensive, but at least have a bare minimum set of disclosure requirements that you can have, and then you could build based off of that.
Yeah, there's huge opportunities in standardizing, even just language.
Absolutely.
I mean, we recently had the the fund naming conventions that came out. So that's a baby step going forward. Maybe even a
yes.
bigger step than that.
Yeah. No, I think that the name change, it was a good move by the SEC in order to do that, because on the one hand, it does help with issues related to greenwashing,
Right.
because you're now establishing that.
Which you've heard me talk about before.
Yes, absolutely. That this is a requirement then to, get to that space. On the other hand, if they had mandated those standards in the first place,
Right.
you wouldn't need this, the change, the name rule wouldn't be necessary to have. I would believe that would be the case. So I just equated it to them putting the cart before the horse in terms of you need to understand and meet this criteria for the naming of the fund, but what exactly that minimum amount of criteria is, they just can't agree upon it yet. So,
Well, because it's a political hot potato, if you will.
Yes.
Because you've got us that are purists, and then you've got the BlackRocks of the world that aren't quite so pure about it, but they've got a lot louder voice than we've got, and so odds are it's going to get diluted no matter what happens.
I agree. Yeah.
So. As you've put this together, what kind of growth have you seen of the CSRIC? I got to get used to calling it that designation.
Absolutely. So the growth is quite remarkable. I'll say that over the course of 5 years, we've had approximately a little over 1,300 individuals who have registered and gone through the course. The designation holders, though, that number is slightly smaller. It's just over 1,000. And the reason for that simply is that they've signed up for the course, they went through the curriculum. They don't necessarily sit for the final exam in order to receive that designation. That's the choice of some individuals. I also equate that to the fact that there's a huge swath of students that come through Georgetown and the University of Denver. There's 2 professors at those universities, respectively, that have taught the CSRIC
Nice.
as an elective, and they've had a few hundred students go through over the years. They're not necessarily in financial services.
They're not practitioners.
Exactly, yeah. So they won't necessarily sit for the exam, but as it turns out, there's rising interest in that demographic. I just learned from the professor at DU that this summer elective offering of CSRIC was the largest enrollment he's seen. And he's been teaching this for about 4 years now, this course. So it's wonderful to.
And we know that,
Yeah.
I mean, That's not surprising. When you look at the statistics that show the demand for sustainable investing, especially among younger people, especially among millennials and Gen Z, it's not surprising that he's seeing a really growing demand for that kind of
absolutely.
class. That just makes a lot of sense. So, in terms of future iterations, you said you're on iteration number 6 right
Yes.
now. Is there anything that you hope to not necessarily change, but how do you see CSRIC evolving going forward?
So one big thing that I'm working with Michael Young at US Civ to resurrect is a biannual update for existing holders of the designation.
Does that mean I have to do more work?
No, you don't necessarily need to do more work, but you certainly can listen in and, learn a little bit more. It's meant primarily to provide an update of the existing course materials
Okay.
for individuals like yourself who perhaps took it a few years ago
Yep.
and you're seeing, a few other reiterations
Right.
later on after the fact. It's meant to update you. And at the same time, things constantly change for CIF. If the trends report is one piece of their updates, but then if there's regulatory items that they've been working on or that they see, it gives them an opportunity to give those students like a mid-year update as to what that environment looks like.
Right.
So that's a big piece of expanding this out for students. In terms of additions to it, what I try to do with every version is add something more.
Yeah,
So
I
there's
can
not really
understand.
areas that I've been necessarily cutting out. One thing I did cut out in the more recent version was to make the trends report for USF like a standalone thing.
Okay.
So if you wanted to look up the latest trends, that's something that you could look up separately versus, and then filling in that empty space with more things that are not necessarily time sensitive, but things that are going to help you
Absolutely.
develop out careers and then, work with clients a little bit more effectively. That's, yeah.
Where do you see, what careers are people in that are taking the CSRIC?
So the vast majority, other than students,
Yeah.
are going to be financial advisors, wealth managers. They either have their own practice. In a lot of cases, they are with a larger firm or a larger bank. Discover that they probably are not going to make that much of a dent in terms of an impact with that group
Right.
necessarily because they're so large. So then they, branch off and start their own practice. Sometimes they'll join a smaller
Do they
group.
join somebody like us?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that certainly happens all the time. And, on the other hand, there are some financial analysts, some asset managers that will go through, those that are in nonprofits. I won't say that that's a broad demographic, but the vast majority are financial advisors. And honestly, the course material was really designed for them,
Yeah.
as opposed to, say, the CFA's ESG certificates.
I was actually going to ask you about that. That was my next
Yeah.
question. So how would you compare and contrast the two?
So the CSRIC's designed, like we talked about, primarily for financial advisors. The CFA certificate is more along the lines of like my historic background in financial analysis, as in equity research, coming up with recommendations for investments and kind of doing the due diligence of like researching the firms.
It's the nitty gritty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Typically advisors will see the results of that research versus this, which is like all of this. I don't want to say the analogy, but like how the sausage is made.
Exactly.
They see how the sausage is made, and then it gets into boop, here's what you are ultimately serving
Right.
to clients.
Right.
So it's a lot more in depth. What I did find, and I've actually gone through the curriculum myself, and personally, I even found it a little bit challenging because what it really does is it's a lot of information, and it looks at everything through that research and investment analysis lens. So
Yep.
even
Well, it's coming from the CFA
Yeah.
Institute. That's not surprising.
Precisely.
Right.
But like to even talk about something like climate change or carbon emissions, like they really will go through it in terms of just the financial aspect of it. There's not a lot of broader things that we might talk
Right.
about why that's important versus financially why that's important. It's kind of how that curriculum's geared.
Well, I think just the fact that CFA Institute found it important enough to add it to their curriculum is really huge. So in terms of CSRIC, we'll go back to that.
Sure.
Are you happy with the growth so far?
Honestly, I am happy with the growth, and I won't, understate that. But what I would love to see, and I wish this would be expanded upon a bit more, is outreach to universities, offering this as an elective, like those two examples that I
Right.
provided before, because those are two models that work really well. And the end result is you have a lot of very inspired young people who ultimately will take this into whatever field that they go into. Even if it's just for their own personal investing,
Right.
that's wonderful, because then it will drive them to someone like you, or, perhaps even inspire them to do that themselves in the
Right.
future. So that's an area, that's a demographic that I would really love to see expand into more, because, on the one hand, there's the group that's basically preaching to the choir at some point.
Of course.
There's, maybe I'll break advisors down into thirds. There's a third that's like very much on board with this. There's a third that's maybe on the fence and could probably be swayed in that direction, provided that they have the right information.
Right.
And then there's a third that's just impossible. We'll never
Understood.
get them.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Yale Climate Communication Six Americas, where you've got those who will never believe climate change is real, and you've got those who are doing everything in their power to talk about it, to change their lifestyle, et cetera. I see you're 100% right. I see that
Yeah.
with advisors as well. So. Everybody that I interview for the podcast gets the same final question.
Okay.
And yes, it's not a hard one.
Okay.
So there's a lot of negativity out there. There's a lot of negativity, especially related to climate. We're seeing hurricanes hit Southern California, which we haven't seen in 80-odd years. We're seeing hurricanes hit New England, which is crazy, right? Wildfires, droughts, all those things. In light of everything that we see happening, how do you maintain hope?
Oh boy, that's a good one. I guess the biggest hope that I have is the fact that the generation after me especially recognizes how big of a problem this is. They need no convincing, and unfortunately the problem has been caused, but ultimately they're the solution.
Right.
Because this is the group that has to live for the next 50, 60 years in this type of environment, and they will find a solution. They will find ways to cope that will be intelligent and reasonable. And unfortunately, we have to wait for a generation to fizzle out in order for maybe more meaningful change to take place. And I don't like to say that or see that happen, but
Right.
yeah, it's
That's where your core resistance is coming from.
absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
a lot of heavy pushback.
Well, Jenny Coombs, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Absolutely. Thank you,
And,
Peter. I appreciate it.
All right, and thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you next time.